Well, we have to start somewhere, so I think I'll start with there is no self. Sounds fairly familiar. I seem to start there quite a lot.
Can you speak up, please?
I will do my best.
Thank you very much. I shall do my very best.
To listen, to hear. We'll all be happy. There is no self. I mean, in a way, that's it. That's the beginning and the end and the middle of non-duality. I mean, talking about this is it's not difficult, it's impossible, and yet some of us feel impelled to try to put the ineffable into words. And those words are as good as any other way of putting it. Seeing non-duality is seeing that there is no self. It's seeing, the phrase that's often used is seeing through separation. It's the sense of being a self or having a self, however we want to put it, which creates a sense of separation. Separation between me, what seems to be me, and the world, what seems to be separate. So, non-duality, not two-ness, as opposed to the state that almost all of us live in, almost all of the time. Hello. So we could call it the normal state, the state of duality. Duality, two-ness, non-duality, not two-ness. So the normal state, the state of two-ness, it's like, well, what creates duality, what creates the two? And it's the sense of self, separate from everything else, that creates that feeling of duality. So we could say, okay, two things. Well, one of them is me, myself, existence as a separate being. And then the other thing in duality is everything else, or what we could say, the world in which I move and which I seem to live. So that gives us the kind of, if you like, the normal state of being. And there's a sense that there is a world which encompasses everything which is not me, people, objects, events, and so forth, and then there's a me that moves through that and has to interact with it and has to negotiate with it. And this causes all kinds of problems, and in a way it's partly because of the problems that it causes that we make up all sorts of stories about meaning that attaches to this me as it negotiates its way through something called the world. And it's like a very normal way of living. It's not like when we're born with this sense of separate self. You know, 3-month-old babies don't have a sense of a separate self, but for most of us, for as long as we've been conscious beings, this is how the world has seemed to be. You know, there's me and there's the world, and I have to negotiate with the world, and I particularly have to negotiate with those other rather awkward bits of the world known as other people. And this is just, you know, it seems like an absolutely natural state of being. For most of us, it's never questioned, and we live, most of us, within one or maybe several stories that we make up to make sense of this. And we could say what belongs to those stories, all the religious stories that we tell about the world, all the philosophical stories that we tell about the world, all the stories of meaning and purpose, the psychological stories that we tell about the world. They're all ways of trying to make sense of this kind of strange situation that we find ourselves in. As the existentialists say, thrust into existence. Without my permission, I am thrust into existence in this world, and now I have to negotiate with it. And some of us can do that pretty well, some of us do it really, really badly. eventually some of us might begin to get the sense that there's something really that doesn't kind of work for us about this arrangement, and we start exploring philosophical ways in which somehow maybe we can put to rest the feeling that there is something at root quite wrong about this. And one day the ultimate catastrophe may happen. One day, out of the blue, the ultimate disaster might happen. There might be a sudden, or it may not be sudden, it might be a gradual, but there may be a sudden waking up to the fact that this that seems separate within the world, it doesn't actually exist. It's more than, it isn't separate in the world, it doesn't actually exist. And this awakening, what's sometimes called awakening, sometimes we use words like liberation, this awakening can happen in all sorts of different ways. But if it happens suddenly, as it can do, it can be very shocking. And the event which gives rise to that shock might literally last. It's kind of timeless. It's kind of it kind of exists in eternity. But if we were to give a duration to it, it might be a split second. It might be a second or two in terms of an event. It seems, incredibly evanescent. It's here and then it's gone. It can be like that, and yet that can change everything about what I thought up to that moment was my existence as a separate being in the world. So we could call a moment of awakening the sudden realization that this that I had assumed myself to be for whatever, let's say 50 years, if that's the time I've had, that event can reveal that everything that I thought I was and am for 50 years is a kind of illusion. I don't use the word illusion very often, and whenever I do, I try to say that what I mean by that is not something that's simply unreal, but something which is very different to what it appears to be. That's what an illusion is. So even a split second of awakening can suddenly reveal that the person that I thought I was simply doesn't exist. I mean, there is, until physical death, there is a psychophysical organism, as I sometimes call it. There's a body-mind, there's a body-brain, if you like. But even a second of awakening can reveal that everything that I assumed about myself as a person living a separate life in a world that I had to negotiate with is false. It's gone. And when it's gone, it's quite likely to take with it many, some, or possibly all of the beliefs that I had about the world. Particularly if I had beliefs about the world which kind of heavy stories about my being in the world with some kind of purpose, with some kind of meaning, moving towards some kind of goal, perhaps a religious purpose, perhaps a spiritual purpose, perhaps a philosophical purpose, a purpose to do with morality, a purpose to do with being good and avoiding being bad, all of these sorts of stories that we love to have, that we love to own. Even a split second of awakening can just annihilate all of those as it's revealed that what there actually is simply I'm stopping, and I'm stopping there because words fail at this point. They always fail at this point. I will grope therefore for some inadequate phrase and then another inadequate phrase, phrases that many of you may have heard or read before, as what's revealed is that there is, it's so difficult to choose from the selection of bad phrases that flow at this point. There is only this. There is only emptiness. There is only what is happening. There is only whatever phenomena are arising. If we want to take it a little bit further, we could say there is only emptiness and fullness. And that's a particularly juicy phrase that maybe we might unpick later on. But the real shock of seeing non-duality, the real shock of seeing the emptiness of the person, if it's seen suddenly, is to see the emptiness of everything. And that this is not separate from the world through which it moves. And that many or all of the things that this as a person may have felt to be most precious, like meaning and purpose and story and goal and aiming through life towards some meaningful goal, all of that can just collapse. And then all that's left is simply what is happening. All that's left is simply this. A number of times, if we're interested in non-duality, if we read about non-duality, a number of times we may have come across this phrase, all there is this in some way or another. And it's meant absolutely literally. Absolutely. There's nothing mysterious. One of the problems about talking about non-duality is at least some, maybe a lot of the phrases that are used, they can sound kind of metaphysical, they can sound philosophical, they can sound metaphorical, they can sound as if they have, maybe they're hinting at some kind of hidden meaning or special meaning. No, absolutely not. It's all meant literally. It's meant literally. What exists is emptiness, is nothingness, appearing as everything. Everything is an appearance. And we could add to that, more mysteriously, most mysteriously of all, that this emptiness, and I'm sorry about the paradox, there's no way around this, that this paradox, that this emptiness is also absolute fullness. It's complete and utter fullness. And at that point, the mind might feel very, very much entitled to ask, well, if there is full, okay, let's forget about the paradox for the moment, let's forget about the annoying Zen, whatever it might seem in nature of a paradoxical. How can it be empty and full at the same time? That's mad. Well, let's just forget about that and ask the other question. Well, okay, if it's full, what is it full of? And there is no phrase that can cover it. There are no words that will cover it, but what I always retreat into, and what some other writers and some other speakers retreat into, I feel like I retreat into it with my hands up, saying I surrender at this point. The mind absolutely cannot describe this, but as we're trying to describe this, I will call that fullness the fullness of unconditional love. And if anybody wants to argue with that or fight with that, I'll back down immediately, because I don't have an investment in it. We'll choose a different phrase.
Why do we use such an emotional term?
Well,
such as love, which just means so many different things.
Absolutely. So well, what kind of love does it? Well, we don't have to use it. We could use a different. Term, and you can use your own term. And some of the terms that are used, for example, is fullness. I'm quite happy to use the word fullness, which avoids such a negative term. But for me, if I'm pushed with my back to the wall, that's the term I prefer. So why do I use it? Only because I prefer it, and for no other reason.
Love, but then it means, what does love mean?
I'll tell you one of the reasons. I use it. In that question, what does it mean? I'm going to assert something here which you may very well disagree with. What I'm going to assert is that in the phrase unconditional love, actually, the tricky bit of that phrase, the word which the mind finds most difficulty with is actually not the word love, it's the word unconditional. Right? So one reason for using the word love, confusing though it is, confusing though any word is, one reason for using the word love might be that virtually everybody does have some handle on what that means. You know, if I say, well, this is fullness, it's a much more abstract term, that you might prefer it for that reason, but then there might be quite a lot of minds that just say, well, fullness, what on earth does that mean? Whereas what I would assert is that everybody, or almost everybody, maybe not complete psychopaths, but they're not likely to be in this room, almost everybody has some kind of handle on what the word love is. They can relate to it in some way. Now the problem for the mind in terms of what is seen in the kind of the ultimate seeing of oneness is, I would assert, not that what is seen is that there is love, but that that love is unconditional. And the problem for that is that the mind always lives in a conditional state. It always lives in conditionality. And so the mind cannot grasp unconditional love. I mean, some minds may say that they can, but I would assert that minds always live in unconditionality. So unconditional love is something that can be seen. I'm not even going to use the word experience. It can be seen, but when the mind gets involved, it can't really be apprehended, because the mind will always divide the world up conditionally. And, well, the most obvious thing is if love is unconditional, it must embrace everything that the mind most hates, because otherwise it wouldn't be unconditional. And for the mind of a person grappling with this, that is, I'm not going to be absolute about this, but that is usually, you know, impossible to apprehend. But what I would say is that that is the kind of the ultimate seeing, you know, that what brings a final full stop to the seeking person. I mean, when non-duality is seen, you know, it doesn't have any implications. You know, anything can happen after that. You know, I mean, unless it coincides with a fatal heart attack, you know, life will go on, and what happens after that, absolutely anything can happen. But what brings an end to the kind of the continuing, or the appearance of the continuing life of the person, I would say, is the seeing of unconditional love. Now, over and over and over again, we may come across reports or read reports or listen to people where there has been an awakening to the emptiness of all things. The conditionality of the person tends to go on after that. In other words, where the emptiness of all things is seen, the person, or the sense of there being a person, or if we like, the illusion that there is a person, tends to come back after that. And the sense that I am still separate tends to go on through the story of time. When this is seen to be full as well, full of unconditional love, if we like that phrase, full of fullness, if we like that word, full, however we want to describe it. Whatever happens after that, this sense of the separate person with a life that they own and which they have to control, or which is perhaps out of control, which is somehow going somewhere, maybe to a meaningful goal, or is failing to go towards a meaningful goal, whatever it is. That's the point at which that sense ends. That's the point at which that sense, we could say, drops away. And then after that, what is left is simply what is happening. But actually, that was always the case. It seemed that always it was the case that there is simply what is happening. That for the one who lives in separation, part of what is happening is the sense that they are a separate person moving through this external world. So if we describe that, as I started off by saying, as duality, there is a separate world, there's a person moving through it. What finally brings an end to that sense is the seeing that this is not just empty, but it's also full. However we describe that fullness, and however we describe it, will always be inadequate.
Self falls away, the sense of self, but there still is a sense, there is those happenings, those experiences that happen specifically to the, let's not call it self, but the body psycho.
Body-mind.
Body-mind happens to that body-mind. It doesn't happen to all the other body-minds. They're all experienced differently. Even so that
Yes.
so we're just saying the concept of an individual person disappears.
Yes.
But not
Yeah.
but not the experience that I had yesterday, which has been very different from the experiences that your body-mind had and your body-mind had. They're all very different, and only this body-mind experienced that specific.
Yeah.
So that's just
the strawberry ice cream I ate yesterday afternoon. You did not taste.
Yeah.
By the way, that's a hypothetical example because my doctor doesn't want me to eat strawberry ice cream. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
So experience continues to arise. You use. I don't know if you can go back when you first started out. You used the word which I was going to disagree with, and now it's gone. No, that's, no. I think you said, I'm not sure if you said about the thought of.
Well, there's no, I mean, I completely get no self, this whole concept of the self.
That was it, stop there, yeah. That was it, that's the word that, wouldn't be part of my description, that this has got nothing to do with concepts. In other words, having the concept that there is no self is a concept, just like any other concept. And when this is seen, there is nothing remotely conceptual about it. No conceptual understanding is necessary. There may or may not be a conceptual understanding. It may or may not arise, but it has nothing to do with the actual seeing, the actual falling away of the self. This is so difficult to talk about because, of course, the obvious way to talk about it would be for me to say, well, it's not a concept, it's an experience. That would be the normal kind of dichotomy to make. But I can't even say it's an experience because there's no one there having an experience. So it's neither an experience nor a concept, and yet when it's seen, and it's incontrovertible when it's seen. And yes, you're absolutely right that the hypothetical strawberry ice cream belongs to me. It doesn't belong to you. Yeah.
But does it matter? Does it
Does
matter?
what matter? The whole shebangle, the whole kit and caboodle that I'm talking about? Of course not.
Thank you.
How could it possibly
That's it
matter?
happens to me because I feel so miserable half the time.
Yes. How can it matter? This is a strong word just popped into my head, and I'm desperately trying to censor it, but as usual I'll fail, For the mind of the person, particularly the mind of a person who is devoted to meaning and is very serious-minded and feels that their life is moving towards some very important goal, whatever the hell that goal is, it doesn't matter.
Most people at mine should think have done that bit.
Well, let's hope so. But to the mind that is still in that state, the strong word that I was trying to and have failed to censor is repulsive. This is repulsive. It's just repulsive, this story. The story of knowledge. Because this is, we're talking in words and ideas, so this is still a story. But it's repulsive to the mind that lives in meaning and purpose. Of course it doesn't matter, because one of the glorious, wonderful, most freeing things about seeing this, why is one of the inadequate words used for this liberation? We've got to use a word. Let's use the word liberation. Why the hell not? It means freedom. One of the most glorious things about seeing this is freedom from, I'm going to say, the shackles of meaning and purpose. I seem to have been taken over by a slightly poetic soul. the shackles of meaning and purpose. I mean, meaning and purpose seem like great gifts for a person. Unless you are actually an existentialist, in which case you should be living in Paris, but if you're not actually an existentialist, one of the worst things is the kind of existential void, and one of the best ways of avoiding that is by attaching your personhood to some meaning and purpose. It doesn't really matter what it is. You know, it could be saving souls for God, that's absolutely fine. And if you want it, it could be slaughtering heathens for God, I mean, that's a good one. It could be saving the planet. And it could be clearing out my psychological clutter by extensive psychotherapy. I'm now in my 21st year of Freudian psychoanalysis, although that's a very good one. Any story that keeps the mind occupied and satisfied is a good story. It's fulfilling its purpose of keeping the mind away from existential despair. One of the glorious things about seeing non-duality is seeing all that meaning and purpose suddenly collapse.
I
And
really
the
like
freedom of
doing
that.
that actually.
Like me doing what?
Shutting up for a bit. The thing I like most of you after hundreds of years, well, you can't do it. You can't do it.
No,
What am I doing coming here?
I have no idea. It's the most bizarre addiction.
I know.
It's just completely mad, but it's no madder than anything else, and in some ways you could say actually it's probably quite a lot saner than, you know, going to, I don't know.
I wanted it to be all
Mass.
loving and all that, you know. Like years and years, I'm sure I can't believe what anybody else can come through and think that I'm now going to be on a lovely place.
Lovely.
Place, you
Yes.
know, that
Yeah.
I'm a good person.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to make a suggestion, which possibly maybe nobody in this room agrees with, although I've made it many times before. You know, that one of the things that is attractive about it is one of the reasons that some of us sort of, you know, want to hear about this, want to be with other people who are talking about this and so forth, is precisely because of that sense of freedom when the stories of meaning and purpose that tend to control our lives collapse. I mean, I've said many a time before, you know, Advaita is freedom. And I keep quoting, I still can't remember who it was that this quote comes from, but I just love it. There is something of the breath of freedom, or the wind of freedom blowing through Advaita. There is something absolutely freeing about this, because all those stories of meaning and purpose end. It is precisely seeing the glorious, not the nihilistic, but the glorious emptiness of everything that creates that freedom. You know, it's freedom from the burden of being a person. I mean, anyone who's done, you know, Philosophy 101 knows that, you know, two different kinds of freedom. We talk about freedom to do stuff and freedom from. This has nothing to do with freedom to do stuff. Absolutely nothing whatsoever. You know, not even freedom to walk through walls and defy the laws of gravity. It's freedom from the stories of meaning and purpose that restrict and control. The freedom, if you like, the freedom just to be. The freedom just to be. There are no particular phenomena associated with seeing non-duality. Anything can happen, and yet, over and over again, you do come across stories of people who simply say, well, I don't know what's happened, but I just like to live a quiet life now. That need for excitement and drama has gone. Not necessarily, it doesn't have to happen, but it happens often enough to make it worth commenting on. But when the drama of being the separate person collapses, then there can be an appreciation of the simplicity of this.
It can be just so funny.
Yeah, and
Just
often,
so funny.
and often it is accompanied by laughter. That final seeing is often accompanied by laughter, because it's kind of such a joke.
It's like I'm on the bus and oh, here he goes again. But it's lovely just to feel joyful. Because I'm not making it like that, and you're down to the bar shop, I'm not doing it either. But it's been such a long time that...
You're doing nothing, and I'm doing nothing, and yet this is happening. Yeah.